So imagine this. You choose a career where your entire purpose is to walk straight into danger, not for thrill, not for glory, but to tell the stories the world would never see otherwise. You're not a soldier, you're not armed, you're not protected. You're there with a camera, a notebook, and a belief that people deserve to know the truth. That was James Foley. Jim wasn't just reporting on the war, he was chasing the human stories inside it. The civilians caught in the crossfire, the lives disrupted, the voices that would otherwise go unheard. He went to places most of us only see in headlines, Libya, Syria, because he believed those stories mattered. Now imagine this, you're in Libya during the uprising in 2011 as a war journalist. The situation is unstable, it's unpredictable, incredibly violent, and then all of a sudden you're taken, kidnapped. There's no control, there's no certainty, no guarantee you're going to be let out. Days blur together into months, every moment is a question mark. And then somehow you're freed. You make it home, you get a second chance at life. For most people, that would be it. That would be the end of the story. You'd hold on to that second chance and never look back. But Jim Foley wasn't most people. So truly imagine this. Despite everything, despite knowing exactly what it feels like to lose your freedom, to sit in fear, to not know if you'll ever see your family again, you decide to go back out. Back into war, back into the uncertainty, back into the danger. Because to you, the story is bigger than the fear. It's about purpose. It's about making a difference. So Jim goes to Syria, and this time history repeats itself, but worse. He's captured again. Only this time it's by ISIS. And this time, there is no coming home. The world doesn't just lose a journalist, it witnesses something brutal, something deeply disturbing. One of the very people trying to show the reality of war becomes a symbol of it in the most horrific way possible. And that's where Jim, the James Foley story, begins. See, what makes this documentary hit as hard as it does is how intimate it feels. It doesn't just walk you through events, it introduces you to Jim as a person. Through interviews with his parents, his siblings, and his closest friends, you start to piece together a full picture of who he was beyond the headlines. You hear about his sense of humor, his warmth, the way he connected with people. There's this consistent thread in every story. Jim had a kind of emotional fearlessness. Not just physical bravery, but a willingness to sit with people in their pain, to listen, to understand. And that's what makes his decision to return to conflict zones feel less like recklessness and more like purpose. The film does an incredible job of grounding you in that humanity. It reminds you that this wasn't just a news story. It was someone's son, it was someone's brother, it was someone's best friend. And by the time the documentary reaches its most difficult moments, you really start to feel that weight. But at the same time, I do think the documentary has its flaws. There's a large portion dedicated to the period after Jim's second capture. The behind-the-scenes effort to negotiate, the endless waiting, the desperate attempts to reach anyone who might help bring him home. And while that's undeniably important, it starts to feel a bit drawn out, like we're watching torture we didn't necessarily need to see. You understand the pain, the frustration, the helplessness, but the film spends so much time there that it slightly unbalances the story. Because on the other side of that, I couldn't help want more focus on Jim's actual work and the psyche behind the man. The documentary tells you who he was emotionally, but it doesn't fully dive into his journalism, what stories covered, the risks he took to tell them, the impact he had on the ground, and that feels like a missed opportunity. Jim Foley wasn't only a victim of a horrific act, he was a journalist with a mission, and while the film honors him as a person beautifully, it could have gone further in highlighting the legacy of his work. Even with that criticism, though, the documentary is undeniably powerful. It stays with you, it forces you to reflect not just on Jim's story, but on the cost of truth-telling in conflict zones and the kind of people willing to take that kind of risk. For me, this lands as a strong 4 out of 5, and if you want to experience it for yourself, Jim, the James Foley Story by Brian Oakes is available to stream on Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon.